On June 19th, 2019, a college student with her entire life ahead of her returns to her family's Prairie Village, Kansas home after studying abroad in Italy. Ellie Green is the only child of Angela and Geoff Green, and the trio was an incredibly tight-knit family. Ellie was likely expecting a happy homecoming, but instead she and Angela got into an argument. According to Ellie, the argument wasn't a bad one, but Angela told her to leave. Ellie went on to stay the night at her boyfriend's house, figuring her mother would cool off soon. But instead of hearing from her mom that night, 3 days went by without a word. Then Ellie received a shocking text from her father that would just be the first in several stories of where her mother was. Now, 3 years later, Ellie is still left wondering what really happened to her mother, Angela Green. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to tell you the story of Angela Green. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flake.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again. Ethan is still in an undisclosed location, so we are doing something new. We are actually recording remotely for the first time.
Yeah, hopefully we're working out the bugs here.
Yeah, it's been quite a process, and this is why I haven't really done interviews on the show, because just dealing with all of this has been very daunting. But now we are doing it, and we are going to record the show like that. So the benefit of it is that, we'll have a little bit of video. I'm not going to release the entire episode because I edit so much out. But, we'll release a few clips here and there. But first, we have a few quick shout outs to people who have joined us on Patreon. Thank you so much to Jennifer N. and Demi May L. from the UK. If you would like to get these episodes early and get rid of all of the GD ads, you can do so for as little as $2 a month over at patreon.com/ATTWGpod. And quickly, Ethan, you sent me a very interesting text related to our Patreon this morning. Would you like to tell them?
I think I finally got through my writer's block, and I wrote 2 episodes today.
Yay! So once you're back, we'll record those and start getting a few episodes of. I've literally
unplugged from the darkness.
Unplugged from the darkness. I was like, I literally forgot what we called it because it's been so long.
It's been a while, and that gets addressed in the first episode that I wrote.
All right, perfect. So you can expect that in a little while, but for now, let's get to the story of Angela Green. Angela Lee Green was born in Baoding, Hebei, China in 1968. The Doe Network has Hinhei listed as an alias, so I'm guessing that's her Chinese name. I don't know much about her life growing up, but she does have at least one sister named Catherine. When Angela was around 20 years old, friends introduced her to Geoff Green, a mechanic and salesman from the United States, Kansas specifically. Geoff was older than Angela by about 17 years. He was divorced with one child, and Angela was young and eager to start her life. The pair's first date was at the Hard Rock Cafe in Beijing, and when Geoff had to return to the States, the two kept up their relationship by writing letters. This was the late 90s after all, so while email was definitely a thing, it wasn't something that everyone had or used frequently. This actually worked out pretty well because though Angela's spoken English wasn't great, she was very proficient at reading and writing it. After about a year of courtship via snail mail, Angela decided to leave her life in China behind and move to Kansas. So she did, and she and Geoff were married in 1998. At first, Angela got a job in the insurance industry, but around 2001, she gave birth to the couple's first and only child, Ellie. After that, Angela became a full-time devoted mother. And devoted she was. Many people who knew the family said that Angela's life basically revolved around Ellie. She didn't really have friends or outside interests other than her garden. She didn't go out much, and even after Ellie went to college, she didn't rejoin the workforce. She just spent more time gardening and just around the house. Ellie described her mother to Dateline as a tiger mom, which is a relatively new term in the cultural zeitgeist, but it basically means an Asian mother who is extremely involved in her child's life and pushes them to be the best. And to be fair, Ellie speaks 4 languages and was valedictorian of her high school class, so, it seems to check out.
Oh, well, I guess my mom was not a tiger mom.
Yeah, you guys, I do think it's funny because so Ethan's stepmom is Chinese and her kids are her stepkids, and you guys are like a cop and, a CO and whatever the hell it is Greg does. And like all of her siblings' kids are like scientists and like I don't know, baseball players and
Oh yeah, no, we're definitely like the black sheep of the family there.
Maybe the tiger mom aspect got to the other ones, but not necessarily the flicks.
Yeah, not so much.
Angela could be difficult and demanding at times, but it doesn't seem like that was something Ellie really examined until after her mother's disappearance. She told Kansas City Magazine, quote, "Now I look back and think she might have had some anxiety. She didn't like driving on the highway. She liked things to be perfect. Sometimes she dropped me off at school and she would be happy, then she'd pick me up and start yelling at me for something that had happened 5 years earlier." End quote. Angela also seemingly chose to isolate herself. Not only did she not have many friends, but she didn't keep in close contact with her family either. I don't know if it was at the exact time that Angela came to the States, but her sister Catherine also ended up coming to America and moving to Kansas. And Catherine's daughter Michelle spent the first 10 years of her life in Kansas. And I think they even lived with Angela and Geoff for like 3 months, while they were getting settled in. And so during that time, she became really close with her Aunt Angela. She just thought she was like this beautiful, amazing, fashionable woman. She would love trying on her clothes, stuff like that. But Michelle says that things changed after she had Ellie. She told Kansas City Magazine, quote, "Angela basically cut off my whole family once she had Ellie. She was obsessed with Ellie, to a point where it was unhealthy," end quote. All right, so let's get back to this argument between Ellie and Angela on June 19th, 2019. Ellie had been away for 2 months, which is certainly the longest period of time that the mother and daughter had been apart. Remember, I said she was studying abroad in Italy. But Ellie was also 18 and wanted to see her friends when she got home. So that's what started the argument. Basically, Angela wanted more family time, but Ellie wanted to see her friends. So it's, the most normal teenager parent fight that you could possibly imagine. And that's why Ellie didn't think it was a big deal at the time. Yes, it was weird that her mom told her to leave. I mean, that wasn't something that she usually did when they argued, but the cause of the fight wasn't that deep. No one was on drugs. No one was pregnant. No one's going to jail. It was just a little dust up. So as I mentioned in the intro, Ellie went to her boyfriend's house after the fight and stayed with his family. The next day, June 20th, Geoff texted her. He said, quote, "How are you? We need to talk about mom," end quote. Ellie wasn't into it. She wasn't ready to talk about it. She just didn't want to deal with him. Geoff, though, had apparently also left the home and was staying with his brother and sister-in-law, Brad and Marva Green. He asked Ellie to come over to their house, but she didn't go. She says now that she doesn't know where her mother was on June 20th, but that she never heard from her.
Okay, so wait. Why wasn't he staying in the house?
It doesn't seem like he was really involved in the fight. A lot of times when they would have these arguments, he would just kind of go off into the other room, it sounds like. But from what it sounds like, Ellie left, and then he decided to leave shortly thereafter and go stay at his brother's house. So, I think the inference could be made that after Ellie left, maybe they got into an argument, maybe something like, hey, why are you being so hard on her? Da 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 da, along those lines. We don't know. But then he went to his brother's house.
Interesting. Do we have a known time that he arrived at his brother's house?
No. And interestingly, like even the dates are a little bit fuzzy on this because everything, in terms of the official like police statements, the Doe Network, NamUs, like everything has June 19th as the date of the fight. And when Ellie left, and Ellie herself in a recorded phone call with Geoff said, yeah, the fight June 19th. But then in a couple of other interviews I've seen with her, she says she last saw her mom on June 20th, but not that was the day after the fight. She always says, so I don't know, because on Dr. Phil and Dateline, she said June 20th. So I'm not entirely sure. I'm just going with June 19th, only because that's a date that was given at the very beginning.
Okay.
On Sunday, June 23rd, Geoff texted Ellie again. This time, he dropped a bombshell. Her mother had been forcibly admitted into a mental health facility.
Okay, so this isn't. She hasn't gone missing yet.
Right.
Okay.
According to Geoff, everything was fine, except now he's saying 3 days later that her mom had like a breakdown.
But does he specifically say when the breakdown happened, or just that it happened in between the fight and now 3 days later?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure which day it happened, but it wasn't the day of the fight. Even though, this is obviously crazy news to be giving, Geoff delivered it pretty nonchalantly, texting at 8:04 that morning, quote, M is getting mental health care and I am beginning to organize. Come by anytime. Front door is open, end quote.
Okay.
Yeah, so like a weird text. And so Ellie's like, I'm sorry, like what? What?
Yeah, right.
Geoff goes on to tell her that he basically felt that Angela needed to be committed, so he called a place down south somewhere, and they came and ambushed Angela in a grocery store parking lot and took her away. Quote, it was a struggle, he told Ellie.
Okay, so her dad had her committed?
Yeah, so that's what it's sounding like. So what her dad is saying, on the 23rd is that for some reason he felt as though, Angela needed to be committed into a psychiatric facility and she didn't want to go. So he like colluded with the doctors or the staff or whomever to, meet her in this grocery store parking lot. Now, part of the reason that he wanted to do it this way is because Angela was like a very, put together woman, like she was the type of woman who like did not leave the house without lipstick kind of lady. And so he said later, he didn't say this like this day, but later when he was talking to Ellie about this more, he said, well, I wanted to do it outside so that she'd be like dressed and she wouldn't be embarrassed by like, being caught in her bedclothes or whatever.
Okay.
So, so he like so he got these people to agree to ambush her in a parking lot and forcibly admit her into a psychiatric hospital, apparently.
So, with my understanding of involuntary commitment, it's that in order for anybody to be committed, like under those circumstances, there has to be evidence that they are a danger to themselves or others.
Right.
So it's not like you can just say, hey, my wife's kind of off her rocker right now. Can you come and pick her up?
Yeah, meet me at the shop and save at 8:30. Like, that's just kidnapping.
Right. So he would have had to have produced some sort of evidence or say something that she was potentially suicidal or homicidal.
Right. He didn't offer any evidence of either of those things.
At least not to his daughter.
Right. He also asked his daughter not to tell Angela's family, the Guos, about this until he had a better idea of what kind of treatment she would need. And he also asked her not to visit her mom until things were more stable, with Angela and her treatment.
Well, so the visiting thing is kind of weird. It doesn't surprise me that he would say, "Don't tell her family." It's a cultural thing, generally speaking, the Asian culture doesn't really talk about their problems, let alone seek mental health help. So I'm sure that had something to do with it, but it is weird that I think he asked Ellie to not show up.
Yeah, so I get it to an extent. Like, it makes sense to me that, he wouldn't want her to tell anyone or go down there immediately while they're still trying to figure out what exactly is happening.
Sure.
But either way, Ellie was completely shocked by the entire situation. This at least explained why she hadn't heard from her mother, but Angela being forcibly admitted into inpatient care is definitely not something that Ellie had seen coming. Now, while we may be looking at this and thinking that the story sounds like super fishy, maybe a little made up with the whole grocery store thing, we have to give Ellie some grace and think about where she's coming from. Like, yes, she's incredibly intelligent, but she was also 18 at the time and extremely sheltered. She was also taught to obey her parents. So, she believed her father. And when he said, don't tell anyone and don't visit, she didn't question it. That's what she did. As the summer went on, Ellie remained with her boyfriend and his family, but she still had a pretty normal-ish relationship with her father, Geoff. He would come and visit her, at the boyfriend's house, and they even had a barbecue together on the 4th of July. So life just went on as normally as it could that summer until July 16th. That day, Geoff drove back to see Ellie, but this time it wasn't for a cookout. It was to tell her that her mother was dead.
Let me just try and get this straight. Allegedly, Dad involuntarily commits mom. And how long goes past? Several months?
About 4 weeks, almost just under a month.
Okay, so just about a month goes past. There's no visitation, and then suddenly
no communication of any kind.
And then suddenly he says she's dead.
Yeah.
I've got a million questions that I'm sure that you will be answered by you continuing. So,
yeah. So this is kind of what he told her. He said that the hospital called him to tell him that Angela had suffered from a stroke while in their care and that she had passed away.
Okay.
This was, of course, devastating news for Ellie to hear, not to mention completely unexpected. Angela was only 51. She was young. And nothing that I've read indicates that she had any underlying health conditions or specific risk factors for stroke or early death in general. But, of course, these things can happen seemingly randomly. So again, Ellie accepted what her father told her.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend that had a stroke, and she was barely into her 30s, 31, 32.
Mm-hmm.
But they found out that the stroke was caused by a tumor in her brain. Same thing, very random, presented with no health issues, was generally a healthy individual and had the stroke, and that's what led to them finding the tumors. So it's not outside of the realm of possibilities.
No, not at all, right? Unlikely, yes. Impossible, definitely not.
Right. Yeah.
Ellie is like, okay, this is horrible, but she accepted it. And she also accepted that her father didn't want to have a memorial service for his wife of over 20 years because she figured that he was grieving in his own way.
Now this is all adding up to be very fishy circumstances, especially considering we're doing a podcast on it.
Right, exactly. But Ellie also accepted that Geoff didn't want her to tell the Guos telling Kansas City Magazine, quote, "I didn't want to ask him a ton of questions and offend him while he was grieving," end quote.
He didn't want to tell her family that she had died?
Correct.
All right. Well, that's just weird.
Yeah. So Ellie grieved her mother in private, and Angela's family had no idea that anything was even wrong. Angela wasn't estranged from her family, but she also didn't speak with them often, usually only around the holidays. And if they called her and she didn't feel like talking, she just wouldn't answer the phone or call them back. So no real alarm bells were, going off on the Guo side. As 2019 went on and Ellie had more time to think about the circumstances leading up to her mother's death, she started to question her father. Why wouldn't he tell her the name of the hospital where Angela died? Well, said Geoff, he was really busy at work when he got the call, and he didn't ask for the name or number of the caller, couldn't remember where the hospital was, and did not ask any further questions.
Oh, okay.
Geoff also decided to cremate Angela, without talking to anybody first. And so Ellie asked to see her ashes, but Geoff told her that they were being sent to him, but he had to buy an urn first. And that kind of makes sense. But according to the Profiling Evil website, he then told her a mysterious man appeared on his doorstep one day, demanding $1,500 in cash in order to get Angela's remains.
Well, that's not real. I mean, it's also not real. Like, the remains get sent to you regardless of whether you have an urn or not. Human remains come to you in a box, like a cardboard box with a bag in it.
Yeah.
And, they don't hold on to it typically until you, quote unquote, until you get an urn. Like, that's not a thing.
And they don't show up on your doorstep demanding cash.
Well, yeah, that's the next part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Geoff says that this is what happened and, he paid him. But none of this made any sense to Ellie for several reasons, like the ones that you already said. But Geoff is also very careful with his money, and he's not the type of guy to give a random stranger $1,500 in cash when they show up at his doorstep.
In hopes that he gets his wife's remains.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, that September, Geoff also had Ellie forge her mother's signature on a life insurance document because their handwriting was so similar.
Okay.
Now, the police do have this document, but I don't know specifically what it is, if he was trying to get a new policy, if it was just some other random life insurance document, I'm not sure. But he was, definitely being shady and trying to get Ellie to help him in September. That November, Geoff finally told a family member about Angela's death, but not Angela's family. It was somebody on Geoff's side. So a few relatives came out to be with them, and Geoff reportedly told these family members that Angela had died at home from a stroke or a heart attack.
Okay. So, I mean, maybe he's trying to, I can't even make excuses for this guy or hypothesize on his reasoning behind this. Like, you could sit there and say that maybe he was trying to
protect her
reputation,
have her or whatever,
have save face in front of relatives or whatever. But come on, how many different stories are we going to hear from this guy?
We're not done. There are definitely more.
There you go.
Yeah. As Geoff's story changed and his answers became more evasive and started making even less sense, Ellie was beginning to grow suspicious. She didn't want to live at home any longer, so in December, Geoff bought a house about an hour away in Lawrence, Kansas. Now, I don't know if he discussed this with Ellie prior to purchasing it, but, this is about 6 months after Angela was last seen. He buys this house, and it's a fixer-upper, and he said that his intention was to get it and fix it up, and Ellie could live in it, while she was attending college. So Ellie was attending the University of Kansas on a scholarship, but Geoff was paying for her living expenses. I did say that Angela's family wasn't really freaking out at this point because they didn't talk to her very often, but But Catherine, her sister, had been trying to get a hold of her about like a wedding or something like that and couldn't. And so, they did start asking Ellie and they started asking questions. And finally, in February of 2020, 7 months after her mother's supposed death and 8 months after she was last seen, Ellie finally told Angela's family about this. She spoke with her cousin Michelle, the one who used to live in Kansas. Her family was now in New York, and Michelle was all grown up and working as a corporate attorney. When Ellie told her the story, Michelle's like, wait, what the hell are you talking about? She immediately was like, this is completely insane. And she told Ellie that she needed to go see the death certificate.
That's smart.
Yeah. And so, Ellie asked Geoff for it, and he's like, oh, yeah, it's at home. It's at home. I'll get it, and never did. And so on February 14th, Ellie drove to the Department of Health in Topeka, Kansas to try to obtain a copy from them. But when she got there and they searched, they couldn't locate a death certificate or a cremation certificate for Angela.
Shocking.
They even performed a nationwide search on her behalf because it did sound like the hospital might have been out of state. And they still came up with nothing. So the next day, the 16th, Michelle called the Prairie Village Police Department and requested a welfare check for Angela. She, of course, wasn't there, and nobody had seen Angela in months.
Right.
Then on February 18th, Ellie filed a missing persons report. And weirdly, while she was at the police station doing this, Geoff called her. And so she recorded this call and let the police hear it. I don't know if she just had him on speakerphone or whatever. In that call, he admitted that he hadn't put Angela in a mental health facility and that she had actually disappeared from their home after her fight with Ellie.
Okay, so there's several laws that he broke.
Yeah. However, in this same phone call, he claims that he later received a call from someone who said that Angela had been admitted into a psychiatric hospital. So he's saying, oh yeah, no, she actually was. That part's true. I just lied about the whole grocery store parking lot part of it, I guess. I don't know why. Then a few weeks after he apparently received this call telling him that Angela was in a psychiatric hospital, he received a call from another random person who told him that Angela had died from a stroke in the hospital. But again, he had no further information because he was too busy at work to ask any questions when this call came through.
He's very trusting of receiving random phone calls with from horrible news.
Yeah, from unidentified strangers.
Yeah, let's not even dig into this. It's like, oh, wow, my wife is in a mental health hospital. Oh, now my wife is dead. Well, okay.
I mean, it really is like that. And Ellie recorded several phone calls between her and her father. And in one, she was like, they're talking about this. And she's like, and so you didn't look into this? You didn't ask questions or do research or anything? And he's like, well, no. He's like, I was at work. It was my busiest time at work. I couldn't do that.
I'm sorry. I'm way too busy to bother with my wife missing and or dead. Sorry. I need to get back to work.
Right. And to just tell that to your only child, it's just insane.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely a pathology of lies here. So.
Yeah. And so Geoff was just telling people all sorts of stories. At one point he said that Angela was actually alive and that she ran off and was partying with friends.
Why not throw that into the mix? Sure.
Well, exactly. But, of course, there are several problems with that. One, Angela didn't really have friends. She was basically a recluse. And she also didn't have her own bank account or any credit cards. So if Angela left of her own volition for whatever reason, whether it's to party or anything else, she did so without her purse, keys, wallet, phone, or passport, all of which were later found in her home. Even though all of this was incredibly suspicious, the early days of the investigation seemingly focused on Angela potentially leaving or like being in a mental facility somewhere. They interviewed neighbors who said that when they hadn't seen her, they assumed she had gone back to China. And yeah, exactly. This is a point of contention with Michelle, who thinks that police wasted too much time, working with DHS and talking to these neighbors, trying to figure out if she did go back to China when there was like literally no reason to think that at all.
Right. Like, why would why would you even chase down that lead, or like put that on the top of the priority? Why wouldn't the priority be finding her?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, and because once Angela moved to the States, she never went back to China, not even for a visit, like, nothing. She just, that part of her life was done. And so, yeah, there was just no reason to think that. So they were doing that. They were, of course, calling different psychiatric hospitals to see if she had ever been a patient there. They were just assuming that some version of Jeff's story was like kind of true or so. I don't know. I don't know. Because it would take about 3 weeks after the missing persons report was filed for police to actually conduct their first searches.
Yeah, I don't understand the order of operations that they went on. I mean, I really don't understand why they would begin to start chasing down the lead that she randomly went to China. That doesn't make any sense, given
Yeah.
that there's no proof. And there's also a very easy way to prove that. I know she doesn't have any credit cards, right? She has no access to
Right.
the money.
And her purse
Okay,
and wallet were there. So, like, the cards that she did have, her checkbook, whatever, it's all there in the house.
so the easy way to eliminate that is look at her bank records, his bank records, and
Yeah.
I mean, was there a plane ticket purchased to China?
No. Yeah. And no charges, were made after she was last seen. I mean, obviously by
Right.
her. Like, obviously he had his charges. The missing persons report was filed in mid February, and they didn't get the first search warrants until March 11th. And on that day, they searched Jeff's home in Prairie Village and a storage facility where he kept classic cars that he worked on. They apparently took cadaver dogs on both of these searches, but they haven't really released any information about that, about what, if anything, was found.
Well, I mean, if they're looking at him as a potential suspect, like they're not going to release a whole lot of
Yeah,
information.
right, of course. And so, after his initial statement to police, like when they first came, he kind of talked to them and said, yeah, I don't know, she took off, whatever. Jeff hired a lawyer and stopped talking. And, to this day has not given a single other statement to police. But, he did still speak to Ellie. And like I mentioned earlier, Ellie recorded these conversations. And Michelle was working with her on this. Like, she would coach Ellie before the calls to, like kind of tell her what information she was trying to get, give her questions to ask, things like that. And so Profiling Evil has some of the recordings, and they just cycle between stories, like, and provide no actual answers. In May of 2020, Ellie started working on the home in Lawrence that her father had bought, that he apparently bought for her so she could live in it. So she didn't move in, but she was apparently there, was starting to fix it up. And one day, while she was there, she found something in the backyard that absolutely terrified her. Out back, and we'll have a picture of this on the blog, and it's also on the Profiling Evil website, was a mound of dirt in the yard with like black plastic underneath a layer of dirt. And there was a cement stepping stone on top, and two of her mother's favorite plants, hostas and yucca, were planted there.
Mm.
So Ellie didn't dig it up, but her fear, is basically that it might be a grave. I mean, and so she went on Dr. Phil and kind of talked about this, and she's like, yeah, I thought the absolute worst when I saw this. It was terrifying.
But she didn't report that to the police.
So it doesn't sound like she did at the time. And I don't know what Geoff said about this or if Ellie asked him about it. I did read somewhere that he did admit to like planting the hostas there, like taking them from their garden at home and planting them. But he said, well, no, it's just the plant because, it was your mother's favorite. And I thought it'd be nice to have like a piece of her there. After this, I mean, their relationship really deteriorated. He wasn't answering questions. He keeps on making up stories. Like she's catching him in multitudes of lies. And like it just was getting bad. And, he was basically starting to not trust her. Like he knew obviously she was working with police and, she kept on asking questions and all this stuff. And so at one point, he just changed the locks on their house. And this is the house like where she still lived. She wasn't staying there, but like that was the house she grew up in and was her home address. But
permanent address.
Yeah, and all of her stuff was in there, but he changed the locks and said she wasn't allowed to come in unless he was physically present. Most of her belongings are still there, but I don't think she ever went back for them. So later that year, at the end of 2020, Ellie appeared on the Dr. Phil show. She told him about that mound of dirt in the backyard, and he arranged for investigators to help get the soil tested. The private investigators told Ellie that all 3 samples she submitted were put in front of cadaver dogs who alerted for human remains. Now, Ellie did turn this information over to police, so I don't know if she had told them before about this like suspicious mound, but once she had these results from the private investigators and the cadaver dogs, she turned that over to police. And so on December 23rd, 2020, they secured a search warrant for the Lawrence home. Like I said, this is about an hour away from their house in Prairie Valley, so it's a different jurisdiction. And I think that this caused some logistical problems. I bring this up because while cadaver dogs were brought to the 2 Prairie Village searches, no cadaver dogs were brought to the Lawrence home. Instead, police dug around by hand.
Okay. It's a small town, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they didn't have cadaver dogs.
Well, right. And that's actually what Ellie said. She said, quote, "The police said they couldn't get the cadaver dogs. They weren't available that day. We worked so hard on the side to give the police that evidence so that they could obtain the search warrant. Then they messed it up," end quote.
I mean, they should have figured something out, scheduled something, got canines from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Prairie Village isn't a big place. They were able to do it. Like, I'm sure they could have figured it out. But for whatever reason, I don't know if they weren't able to, get a second, if they would have needed a second search warrant to return or what. But I don't think that they've ever gone back. In early 2021, as the 1-year mark of the police investigation loomed, Prairie Village Police Department Detective Sergeant Adam Taylor said that they had followed up with over 150 leads and that they did have evidence that they had sent to the KBI's crime lab. They were also working with the FBI, but I don't think they had officially joined the case by then. I think that happened a few months later. But in any case, the FBI is now involved. But despite this, not much happened to move the case forward in 2021. That year, Ellie was a junior in college, and she decided to transfer to the University of Colorado. She graduated in 2021 with a degree in finance and decided after graduation to officially cut all ties with her father. Ellie returned to Kansas in May of 2022 to compete in the Miss Kansas pageant. The winner of that pageant would go on to compete in the Miss USA pageant, which Ellie said she watched with her mother every year. She told Fox 4 reporter Sharia Honeycutt, quote, "That will be a very sweet remembrance. I'll have my friends and my people that I now count as family there in the audience for me, along with her from above," end quote. I cannot understand how this case isn't going somewhere.
I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that the police are waiting to find a body. There are so many ways that they could go with this. I'm surprised that they're not going in some direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And, Ellie and Michelle are like, there has been no progress made on this case. And it seems like the most, we've covered a lot of stories with very suspicious seeming husbands, but dear Lord, like, I don't know that it's gotten more suspicious than this.
I mean, yeah, all the evidence is pointing to him. He's making up stories, like
she's in a psychiatric hospital. She's dead. No, she's alive. No, actually, she's dead. Like, I don't understand it at all.
like I said, the only thing I can think of is that they're waiting for a body to turn up.
But Ellie and Michelle continue to investigate Angela's disappearance, but, it's taken a toll on them, both emotionally and financially. Michelle said that she's put in around $20,000 of her own money toward the investigation, and she even had to take a leave of absence from work. Since 2021, they have been trying to raise money for a lawyer to work with them on bringing a wrongful death suit against Geoff. Basically, like, they want him to talk, but his Fifth Amendment rights mean that he doesn't have to talk to police. But that doesn't apply in civil court. And in addition to Geoff, Ellie and Michelle want his brother and sister-in-law, Brad and Marva, to publicly state what they know. Well, you mentioned them way back at the beginning of this story, but, Geoff was apparently with them right after, and like Ellie confronted them and was like, hey, like, what is going on? What do you know about my mother? And they're like, oh yeah, I don't know. I don't remember the last time I saw her. Maybe like 2 weeks after my dog died. And she's like, you remember when your dog died, but not the last time you saw my mother who is missing? Like, what? And they have refused to give her any more information. Ellie and Michelle are also hoping that any potential information that's uncovered in a civil trial could help jumpstart the criminal investigation, which, while open, has gone stagnant. And technically, it's actually not even a criminal investigation at this point because Prairie Village is still classifying this as a missing persons case. And they've publicly said, like, right now it's a missing persons case, like maybe it'll be a criminal case down the line, but it's not right now.
I'm telling you, they're pushing it off because they don't have a body, and they're hoping that the body washes up somewhere not in their jurisdiction, and they can pass the investigation off.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe like, considering that, the cadaver dogs alerted on the soil in Lawrence, Kansas, which isn't Prairie Village's jurisdiction. Like, maybe that is what they're hoping. But I don't know what Lawrence police are doing, if anything, because obviously they're not the leads on this. It's not really their investigation. So, yeah, I have no idea. But apparently in 2022, like, the FBI has gotten involved. Like I said, police were kind of recanvassing the neighborhood and stuff like that. So maybe they're starting up something again, I would hope. I mean, there just really haven't been many updates in this, unfortunately, and insanely. Now, Michelle and Ellie have a GoFundMe, which we've linked in the show notes to help them raise money for a lawyer for that civil suit that I mentioned. As of this recording, they have raised just over half of their $50,000 goal. So I would like for everybody listening to please go to the link and donate if you can, or share the GoFundMe. They also have a change.org petition to raise awareness and get justice for Angela. We've also linked to that, and it only takes a moment to sign. Ellie, of course, has regrets about the last time she saw her mother, telling CBS 19, quote, "Of course I wished I had hugged her, said I love you, said something to her," end quote. But one thing she won't regret is not doing enough to solve the mystery of what really happened to Angela Green. Ellie and Michelle persist, and we can help them. Share their story, share the change.org petition and the GoFundMe, donate if you're able. Ellie Green believes that her father, Geoff Green, knows what happened to Angela. He's currently 70 years old. Let's help her get answers before it's too late. Angela Green is a Chinese woman with brown hair and brown eyes. She is 5'9" and 116 pounds. Her ears are pierced. Angela was 51 when she went missing. She would be 54 today. Anyone with information can anonymously call the Greater Kansas City Crime Stoppers Tips Hotline at 816-474-TIPS or the Prairie Village Police Department at 913-642-6868. Tips can also be submitted online at tips.fbi.gov. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, and then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
We'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.